It's a delight and privilege to catch up with Mr. Ali Bandali, who's the President and CEO of Givesight Global. Thank you so much, Ali, for taking the time.
Thank you, Vinod, for giving me this opportunity to spend time with you.
Ali, just wondering, for people who don't know about Givesight Global, could you talk a little bit about what it is and what your plans are?
Givesight Global is an organization that's been around since 2017, but only recently have we decided to pivot a little bit to take on a more global approach in a more meaningful way. So our approach is to take a social entrepreneurial view of eliminating avoidable blindness in the world by sort of socially amplifying our donors' investments in us and our work.
And having such a wide experience, both in the nonprofit sector as well as the eye care sector, what do you think NGOs should be doing better so the unreached can be reached, so everyone gets access to a pair of spectacles or eye care services?
Well, I believe that there's a lot of room for organizations to work with one another in the NGO sector, and then specifically in the eye health sector, where I've spent the last 4 years really studying what's being done. Our approach is actually going to be very inviting to have the opportunity to work with other organizations. Many different organizations do for some fantastic work, but given how they've began and what their stated missions and roles are, limits them sometimes in terms of looking at the ability to do much more than they want to do. Our approach will be to try to find a way to set the framework, which is what I meant by socially amplifying our donors' investments. Imagine a world where what I've learned is that NGO hospitals do end up making a little bit of money, but not enough to capitalize their expansion and reaching more unreached people. So imagine a world where there is a hybrid capital debt plan where we help those hospitals capitalize and then expand their reach to a greater community, and then know that some of that money is coming back to be reinvested in the community. That gives us ability to deal with inequity in reach of gender. It also gives us the ability to measure economic impact of the investments that we've made, but it also gives us an opportunity to reinvest some of that money back into the community so that we can turn the problem of avoidable blindness into a financial opportunity for the community. And then that helps the community maintain a cycle of financial stability moving forward.
And then, in terms of, your work with NGOs, I'm just trying to understand a bit more in terms of where do governments come in? I mean, governments usually, have the best infrastructure. They got tons of people. What should the relationship between the NGOs and the government be for something to be sustainable?
Well, I've always believed that NGOs should always be focused on working themselves out of jobs. And so that should translate to working themselves out of communities, one village, one community, one state, one country at a time. So the role of government and the relationship with government is absolutely critical for that success to happen. And so in order for communities to see that governments have bought in, sometimes it takes demonstrating the effect. So earlier I talked about the economic impact. If I'm going to make a $1 investment into a community, but be able to measure and show the government that there was a 5 times factor of that as an economic return of a certain percentage of their population being able to go back to school because they're no longer home taking care of their parents, or those parents are now being able to go back to work, then those are the types of advocacy pieces of evidence that government needs to understand how they can now also be a part of that. Plus, that infrastructure is built. And so they're not reliant on NGOs, as I think in the past governments have become. And so we have to play a transitionary role of working ourselves out of communities.
Yeah, and lastly, as someone who's worked in the non-profit sector for a very long time, what does making a difference mean for you as a person?
That's it's a very interesting question. For me, it's lead by example. There's a saying that I grew up with where it says "work no words," and and I think you could change that to "work not words." And you have to try to find a way to lead by example. And over the last few months, as I've worked with Givesight Global to determine our focus, one of the things that's been very clearly communicated to me from my board of directors is we will work by showing our lead, not by sitting back and dictating what we think should happen. So our first project, which we'll be announcing in the next week or two, will demonstrate our role in leading that, and then in the future being able to show how we can work with other organizations who have specialties in each of those areas to then partner with us in other areas of the world.
Thank you so much, Ali, for taking the time and talking to us.
It was all my pleasure, Vinod. Thank you very much for having me.